Europe, 1943. The night sky trembles under the roar of engines. Searchlights stab upward through the dark, anti-aircraft guns blaze in frantic arcs, and a swarm of fast, low-flying silhouettes slash across the horizon. They are not lumbering bombers, easy prey for gunners. They are something else, sleek, vicious, and terrifyingly fast. They are the Douglas A-20 Havocs, and they are coming in low with bombs armed, guns blazing, and a speed that makes every German soldier below feel helpless. Now shift thousands of miles away, the Pacific Theater. Japanese supply convoys snake across the sea, hoping to outrun American submarines and aircraft. Suddenly, out of the clouds, A-20s dive like predators, raking decks with machine gun fire, dropping bombs that tear apart fragile transport hulls. Before a single anti-aircraft gun can adjust, the Havocs are already gone, climbing back into the sky with the speed of shadows vanishing at dawn. The A-20 Havoc was a paradox. Light but deadly, small but devastating, simple in appearance yet sophisticated in effect. Designed as a fast attack bomber, it became one of the most versatile warplanes of the Second World War. Its twin engines gave it blistering speed, its low-level strike capability made it the bane of supply lines, and its adaptability turned it into a bomber, a strafer, a reconnaissance platform, and even a night fighter. Against Germany and Japan, it was not just a plane, it was a scythe cutting through arteries of war. Imagine standing in a German bunker in Normandy as dawn breaks. The ground shakes, the air splits with the scream of diving aircraft. You rush outside and catch a glimpse of the Havocs, flying so low you can see the glint of sunlight on their canopies. In seconds, bombs detonate along rail lines, fuel depots erupt in flame, and trucks scatter like insects. Before you can even raise your rifle, the Havocs vanish, leaving only smoke and ruin behind. Or picture yourself aboard a Japanese destroyer in 1944, scanning the skies for American carrier planes. Suddenly, A-20s burst out of cloud cover, strafing your decks with blistering .50 caliber fire. You dive for cover, but already the bombs are falling, tearing through steel. Within minutes, your ship lists, burning, while the Havoc streak away untouched. This was the power of speed. The Havoc didn't linger. It struck hard, fast, and without warning. It punished any army or navy that depended on fixed positions, convoys, or fragile infrastructure. Germany learned this lesson in shattered railways and burning convoys. Japan learned it in the smoking wreckage of supply ships and airstrips reduced to rubble. In this story, we'll uncover how the A-20 Havoc carved a legend across two hemispheres, the European front and the Pacific Islands. We'll step into the cockpit, grip the throttles, and feel the rush of diving at 300 miles per hour straight into enemy fire. And by the end, you'll understand why this fast, furious warplane became one of the most feared attackers of the Second World War. So buckle in, subscribe to the channel, and join us as we explore how the A-20 Havoc brought speed, power, and relentless assault to two collapsing empires. The A-20 Havoc entered war not in American hands but in British ones. To the Royal Air Force, it was the Boston, a machine with teeth sharper than anything the Luftwaffe expected to face in the skies of 1941. Germany had grown used to lumbering British bombers, slow-moving Wellingtons and Hamptons that were easy prey for night fighters. Then came the Havoc, streaking across the channel at terrifying speed, hugging the earth so closely that trees seemed to bend in its slipstream. The first missions were audacious, low-level raids against Nazi-occupied France. German flak crews, trained to track steady bombers, suddenly found their targets too fast, too fleeting. Searchlights caught only glimpses, silver flashes of twin engines, gone before gunners could even adjust. In minutes, rail yards exploded, fuel depots lit up like candles, and convoys of trucks were scattered in fire and panic. The Havoc did not linger, it struck and vanished, leaving silence in its wake except for the crackle of flames. To the Germans, this was more than material destruction. It was humiliation. Reports from occupied France carried a new fear: Allied aircraft that could outrun interception, immune to predictable defense. They came like lightning and were gone like ghosts, a German officer reportedly complained. The Luftwaffe's night defenses, designed to catch heavy bombers, were nearly useless. Havocs carried radar countermeasures, electronic warfare equipment, and speed that mocked German coordination. The British were quick to adapt Havocs into night fighters. With airborne radar mounted in the nose, they prowled the skies hunting Heinkel and Junkers bombers. Suddenly, the hunter became the hunted. Luftwaffe crews who once roamed the night found themselves stalked by Havocs that slipped unseen into their tails before unleashing streams of .50 caliber fire. Night after night, German losses mounted, not to massive formations but to small packs of Havocs that sowed chaos. This new breed of warplane carried a symbolism deeper than bombs. It signaled that the Allies were shifting from endurance to offense, from absorbing blows to delivering them. And it spread quickly. Britain bought them in the hundreds, Canada trained pilots on them, Australia requested them, and soon even the Soviet Union would demand them in bulk. The Havoc became a common predator in Allied skies. Imagine being a German soldier stationed near Calais, listening to the distant rumble of engines. At first you relax, expecting the ponderous growl of heavy bombers. But instead the sound grows sharper, higher-pitched, more menacing. Before you can take cover, A-20s roar over rooftops, strafing with machine guns that chew brick and steel alike. Explosions follow, fuel tanks erupt, and in seconds it is over. The soldiers stare into the smoke, shaken not only by what they lost but by how fast it happened. The Havoc's very speed redefined psychological warfare. Germany's Blitz had once terrified Britain with sudden destruction delivered from the air. Now the tables had turned. The Allies had their own fast raider, a plane that mirrored the speed and fury of the Blitz but carried it back across the Channel into the heart of occupied Europe. The baptism of fire in European skies demonstrated the Havoc's role as a harbinger. It was not designed to duel Messerschmitts or Spitfires, it was designed to ruin infrastructure, convoys and morale with devastating speed. It proved that the skies could be dominated not only by fighters or heavy bombers but by an entirely new breed, the fast attack bomber. This was the first chapter in a wider saga. From the English Channel to the deserts of North Africa, from the frozen fields of Russia to the islands of the Pacific, the Havoc would become a universal menace. Its reputation spread faster than the planes themselves, a whisper that wherever the Allies advanced, these sleek twin-engine hunters followed. Germany and Japan both learned the same bitter truth. The Havoc turned every battlefield into a hunting ground. The Desert War was supposed to be a contest of tanks and artillery, a grinding duel across endless sands. But for German and Italian soldiers in North Africa, another terror emerged, one that swooped down with the fury of a sandstorm and vanished before a shot could be answered. That terror was the A-20 Havoc. By 1942, the Allies had carried the Havoc into the North African theater, where Rommel's Afrika Korps once believed itself master of maneuver. But the Havoc rewrote the rules. Its speed allowed it to skim low over dunes, invisible until the last moment. Columns of trucks carrying fuel and ammunition, the lifeblood of desert warfare, became perfect prey. Before drivers could even brake, Havoc screamed in, strafing with nose-mounted machine guns and unleashing bombs that turned convoys into burning scrapyards. Survivors described the horror of vehicles erupting one after another, like a line of dominoes falling in fire. The Luftwaffe had little answer. Messerschmitt fighters could catch slower bombers, but the Havoc was no easy mark. Flying low at 300 miles per hour, it blended with the heat haze, slipped under radar and struck before interceptors could climb. Flak guns, positioned to cover airfields and depots, struggled against the Havoc's speed and unpredictable angles of attack. Gunners spoke of shadows that became firestorms, planes too fast to track before explosions rocked the ground. The Havoc's role in the desert was not limited to convoys. Airfields became frequent targets. Axis planes lined up neatly on runways were shredded in seconds as Havocs swept over with bombs and strafing fire. One raid on an airstrip near Benghazi left more than a dozen Luftwaffe aircraft burning before the defenders could scramble. Rommel himself lamented the growing inability to protect his fragile supply lines. The desert might have been vast, but no corner was beyond the reach of the Havoc. What made these strikes devastating was not just destruction but repetition. The Havoc did not appear once and leave. It came back day after day, night after night, turning the desert into a hunting ground. Axis soldiers began to dread the distinct engine note of twin Allison or Wright engines. To them, it was the sound of inevitability. Within moments, steel and fire would fall from the sky. The Havoc's adaptability magnified its terror. Equipped with extra fuel tanks, it could range deep into enemy territory, hitting depots that had once seemed safe. Some squadrons modified Havocs with heavier forward armament, turning them into flying cannons capable of ripping apart tanks and armored vehicles. Others carried fragmentation bombs, perfect for scattering infantry formations. The result was a plane that could devastate any target, anywhere, with the same speed and precision. Allied troops adored the Havoc. To soldiers on the ground, watching columns of enemy vehicles go up in flames from strikes overhead, it was a reassurance that the tide of war had shifted. The RAF, USAF, Free French, and even South African Air Force operated Havocs in the desert. It was not just an American weapon, it was a shared predator across the Allied cause. The battlefield seemed saturated with them, as though every sky carried at least one Havoc circling, waiting for prey. German diaries captured the despair. "We fear the Havocs most of all," one soldier wrote, "because they do not fight us, they simply kill us." The Luftwaffe's vaunted reputation could not protect convoys from being torn apart. Anti-aircraft gunners spoke of firing wildly, more in desperation than hope. The Havoc's raids disrupted Rommel's timetable, cut fuel to his panzers, and weakened every offensive before it began. The irony was cruel. Rommel had built his strategy on speed and surprise, using maneuver to outwit slower Allied forces. But now the Allies wielded a weapon of speed greater than his own. The Havoc turned his doctrine against him, outpacing his convoys, outrunning his defenses, and striking with the kind of sudden ferocity once associated with the desert fox himself. The hunter had become the hunted. By late 1942, as Operation Torch brought more American units into the fight, Havocs swarmed the skies in unprecedented numbers. Their raids supported the drive across Tunisia, hammering Axis retreat routes and annihilating whatever supplies reached the front. The desert became a graveyard not only for tanks but for trucks, depots, and entire convoys erased by Havoc squadrons. The Afrika Korps could no longer maneuver freely. Every movement risked annihilation from the air. I believe this was the moment the Havoc proved its global impact. It was not tied to one theater or one tactic. Whether over France or the Sahara, it performed the same function: speed, strike, vanish. To the Germans there was no safe zone. Whether in a European rail yard or an African desert road, the Havoc turned the battlefield into its hunting ground. North Africa ended with Axis surrender in May 1943. But for many survivors, the lasting memory was not the desert sun or the sandstorms. It was the streaking shape of a Havoc dropping from the sky, unleashing destruction and vanishing before anyone could react. In their minds, the desert was not only lost to Allied tanks and artillery. It had become the hunting preserve of the Havoc. If the deserts of North Africa were a hunting ground for the A-20, the Eastern Front became its slaughterhouse. The Soviet Union, bloodied yet unbroken, needed every weapon it could find. Through Lend-Lease, thousands of A-20 Havocs streamed across icy convoys into Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, where Soviet mechanics repainted them in red stars and prepared them for the deadliest front of the war. To the Soviets, the A-20 was more than a bomber. It was a scalpel for deep strikes, a hammer for armored formations, and a shield for advancing troops. The Red Air Force called it the Boston, and soon whole regiments were flying them. Against the Wehrmacht, already stretched across endless plains, the Havoc became a nightmare without reprieve. Picture Kursk in 1943, the largest tank battle in history. The steppe roars with engines, panzers grinding forward in waves. Suddenly, from the horizon, Havocs arrive in tight formations, flying low, fast, and merciless. Bomb bays open, fragmentation bombs cascade downward, ripping infantry and soft vehicles apart. Nose-mounted machine guns rake tank columns, smashing supply trucks and half-tracks. Before German gunners can aim, the Havocs are already gone, leaving smoking wreckage behind. Survivors stumble out of burning vehicles, dazed and shaken, whispering curses at the Boston that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The Luftwaffe, once dominant over Russia, was in decline. Its best pilots were dead or trapped in defensive roles, its fuel supplies dwindling. Against Havocs flying in swarms, German interceptors could rarely respond in time. The Havoc's twin engines allowed it to outrun many opponents at low altitude, and its rugged frame absorbed hits that would have shredded a Ju-88 or P-2. German reports spoke of frustration. The Boston comes fast, strikes hard, and leaves before pursuit can form. Soviet crews loved the Havoc. Its cockpit was spacious compared to domestic designs, its controls forgiving, and its survivability unmatched. Pilots learned to trust its resilience, diving into flak storms with the confidence that their machine would bring them back. Gunners praised the dorsal turret, which gave them a chance against German fighters swooping from above. The teamwork of pilot, gunner, and bombardier mirrored Soviet doctrine of collective effort, and the Havoc fit seamlessly into Red Air Force tactics. At Stalingrad, Havocs played a crucial role in choking German supply lines. They hunted transport columns across the steppe, bombing bridges and strafing roads until German divisions starved in the ruins of the city. Survivors remembered nights lit by endless fires, set ablaze by fast-moving squadrons of Havocs. What the Luftwaffe had once done to Soviet cities, the Soviets now returned with Havocs in hand. The psychological impact was enormous. German infantrymen on the Eastern Front already lived under constant fear of Soviet artillery, snipers, and tanks. Now the skies carried a new predator. The Havoc was not a lumbering daylight bomber like the American B-17, it was a low-flying executioner, arriving suddenly and killing with surgical precision. Soldiers wrote home of dreading the distinctive whine of its engines. They were devils, one recalled, always too fast, too sudden. By 1944, as the Red Army advanced westward, Havoc spearheaded air strikes deep into occupied Poland and eastern Germany. They tore into retreating convoys, bombed railway junctions, and flattened depots. In some battles, German commanders lost entire divisions' worth of equipment not to tanks but to Havocs, erasing their logistics from the air. The Wehrmacht, once master of blitzkrieg, now tasted its own medicine, speed and shock delivered from the sky. The Havoc's endurance on the Eastern Front also demonstrated its adaptability to extreme conditions. Soviet mechanics flew them in winter, engines coated in ice, fuselages painted white to blend with snow. They used them in summer heat, engines howling above dust-choked runways. No matter the season, the Havoc delivered. Its reputation grew so vast that Soviet propaganda posters depicted the Boston as a steel hawk diving on fleeing Germans, a symbol of vengeance. What made the Havoc's Eastern service unique was scale. Thousands operated under Soviet colors, more than any other Allied air force. For Germany, this meant the Havoc was inescapable. Whether fighting in Africa, Italy, France, or Russia, German soldiers encountered the same shape, the same twin engines, the same sudden violence. The Havoc had become universal, a predator spanning continents. At the war's end, Havocs joined the final assault on Berlin. They shredded defensive lines, bombed strongholds, and paved the way for Soviet armor rolling into the Reichstag. For Germans trapped in the ruins, the Havoc was the last reminder of how far the skies had turned against them. The aircraft that had first struck France under RAF command now closed the circle over Germany itself, this time in Soviet hands. I believe this made the Havoc more than a plane, it was a symbol of Allied unity through steel. American factories built it, British and Soviets flew it, Germans feared it, and Japanese soon would as well. It blurred national lines, becoming a truly international executioner of Axis hopes. Its roar carried the weight of 3 continents, a mechanical chorus that drowned out the myth of Axis supremacy. For the Wehrmacht soldier retreating across ruined fields, every shadow overhead became suspect. Was it another Havoc? Would the next minute bring explosions? Such constant fear eroded willpower as surely as bullets and bombs. That was the Havoc's greatest triumph, not only killing men and machines but killing confidence. On the Eastern Front, the Havoc proved that speed and persistence could shatter even the most hardened army. It was a scythe cutting through columns of steel and flesh, and the harvest was always German blood and fire. The Pacific was a theater of extremes, endless ocean, isolated islands, brutal weather, and battles that decided the fate of empires. Into this crucible came the A-20 Havoc, a machine whose speed and ferocity translated perfectly to the sprawling battlegrounds of the Pacific. While heavy bombers pounded strategic targets from high above, the Havoc became the sharp blade cutting close to the surface, delivering sudden death to Japanese convoys and outposts. By late 1942, American squadrons were flying Havocs out of New Guinea, a front line so harsh it tested every machine to breaking point. The Havoc thrived. Japanese supply lines across the Solomon Sea became hunting routes. Convoys steaming at night, hoping to evade submarines, discovered at dawn that their real predator flew with the rising sun. Havocs came in low, so low their propellers seemed to skim the waves, unleashing strafing fire that ripped across decks. Bombs followed, tearing fragile transports apart. Survivors leapt into burning seas as the attackers vanished before Japanese escorts could respond. For the Imperial Navy, these losses were devastating. Japan's war effort relied on fragile supply convoys to feed distant garrisons. Each Havoc raid meant troops went hungry, reinforcements arrived late, and ammunition never reached the front. It was death not only by bombs but by starvation and isolation. Japanese commanders described the skies as infested with Allied fast bombers. Wherever convoys tried to hide, Havocs appeared, like hawks circling prey. Airfields became prime targets. Japanese doctrine had depended on projecting power from island runways, using Zero fighters to maintain air superiority. Havoc shredded that system. Flying at treetop level, they erupted from jungle cover and laid waste to parked aircraft, fuel depots and hangars. At La Rabaul and Buna, raids destroyed dozens of planes before Japanese pilots could even start their engines. Entire squadrons vanished in flames, not in combat but in their own shelters. The Havoc's speed made these strikes almost impossible to stop. Anti-aircraft crews barely had time to load before bombs detonated around them. Pilots reported seeing gunners frozen in disbelief, caught between firing and diving for cover. Zeros scrambled too late, forced to chase attackers already speeding away. In the Pacific, where reaction time meant survival, the Havoc's ability to strike and vanish in minutes proved decisive. The Allies embraced the Havoc's adaptability. Squadrons experimented with modified noses packed with additional .50 caliber machine guns, creating flying gun platforms that swept beaches and trenches. Others carried incendiaries, setting Japanese depots and supply dumps ablaze in spectacular firestorms. With range-boosting fuel tanks, Havocs reached distant targets, crippling Japanese bases far beyond the front line. No matter the mission, convoy attack, airfield raid, or close support for Marines, the Havoc delivered with terrifying precision. The Japanese began to speak of the daylight demons. Soldiers in jungle outposts dreaded the sudden scream of engines overhead. They dug deeper trenches, camouflaged positions, even prayed to the heavens for clouds to hide them. But clouds did not save them. Havoc simply appeared out of storms, masked by weather, descending without warning. Survivors described raids as thunder without storm, the shock of devastation delivered under clear skies. In the Solomon Islands, Havocs joined coordinated strikes with other Allied aircraft, forming deadly attack waves. Fighters cleared the skies, bombers struck infrastructure, and Havocs finished the job at low altitude, strafing survivors and obliterating defenses. This three-tiered assault became routine, each mission leaving Japanese strongholds weaker and morale more shattered. For garrisons cut off from supply, the Havoc was the face of doom. The psychological toll mirrored what the Germans had felt in Europe. Japanese diaries spoke of sleepless nights, of soldiers flinching at every sound resembling engines. "They come too fast," one infantryman wrote, "before we can think, we are already burning." 4 men isolated on distant islands, the Havoc symbolized inevitability. They knew help would not arrive, and sooner or later the low roar of twin engines would seal their fate. The Allies saw something else: opportunity. The Havoc's reliability under tropical conditions convinced commanders to expand its use. Australia received Havocs, flying them in joint operations with U.S. units. Their speed and agility impressed Commonwealth pilots, who used them to devastating effect in coastal strikes. The Pacific sky seemed full of Havocs, Allied nations sharing the same predator. To Japan it was as if every enemy nation fielded the same relentless hunter. These early campaigns marked the moment when the Havoc's reputation spread across oceans. It was no longer just a European raider or a Soviet scythe. It was now a Pacific executioner. The Japanese learned what the Germans already knew: the Havoc transformed every battlefield into a hunting ground. Its presence meant convoys could not sail, airfields could not rest, and soldiers could not relax. By 1943, the Havoc had cemented its role as the nightmare of Japanese logistics. It did not win battles by itself, but it eroded the foundation of Japan's war effort: food, fuel, ammunition, and morale. Each strike cut arteries too fragile to repair. The Japanese Empire, stretched thin across islands, could not endure such constant predation. And the Havoc, with its speed and persistence, made collapse only a matter of time. This was the Pacific baptism of fire. The Havoc had proven itself as more than a tool of Allied power. It had become a symbol of inevitability, the hammer falling on an empire too far extended. And as the Allies pressed deeper into the Pacific, from New Guinea to the Philippines, the Havoc would only grow bolder, faster, and deadlier. By 1943, the Allies had seized the initiative in the Pacific. Nowhere was this clearer than over the jungles of New Guinea and the waters surrounding the Philippines. Here, the A-20 Havoc turned the skies into a hunting preserve, stalking Japanese columns, convoys, and strongholds with relentless speed. For the Japanese garrisons defending these islands, the war had become less a fight for survival and more a waiting game, waiting for the moment the Havocs would appear, engines screaming, bombs armed. New Guinea was a nightmare battlefield, tangled jungle, suffocating heat, and supply lines that depended on fragile airstrips and overland trails. The Havoc thrived in such chaos. It swooped down treetop high, strafing Japanese troops struggling along narrow roads, tearing through trucks and artillery pieces with streams of .50 caliber fire. A single pass could scatter entire battalions, soldiers diving into mud as explosions shredded palm groves around them. Survivors described these raids as sudden eruptions of hell, the ground shaking, the air splitting, the jungle itself torn apart by fire. But the real devastation came from airfield attacks. Japanese bases at Wewak and Hollandia were struck repeatedly, Havocs arriving in waves. Fuel tanks burst, hangars collapsed, and planes were destroyed before they left the ground. Japanese pilots grew bitter, noting that they lost more aircraft to Havoc raids than to aerial combat. Each time new fighters arrived by transport, Havocs descended and erased them before they could even assemble. The skies became a cruel paradox. Japanese pilots could not contest air superiority because their planes never survived long enough to take off. In the Philippines, the Havoc's speed transformed interdiction into annihilation. Convoys steaming through the archipelago's narrow straits were ambushed again and again. Havocs tore into transport after transport, leaving burning wrecks dotting the coastline. Japanese destroyers and escorts, once confident in their anti-aircraft fire, found themselves helpless against aircraft that appeared at mast height and vanished just as quickly. Many captains reported feeling powerless. The Havoc struck too fast, too low, and always at the weakest moment. For ground troops, the Havoc became a phantom tormentor. At dawn, formations appeared from the horizon, strafing trenches and blasting bunkers with pinpoint bombing runs. By dusk, another wave arrived, shredding reinforcements and convoys. At night, Japanese soldiers whispered that the Havocs would come even through darkness, because there was no rest, no reprieve. Diaries captured the despair. We eat in fear, we march in fear, we sleep in fear. Every sound becomes the Havoc. The Allies understood the psychological warfare this created. Commanders deliberately rotated Havoc raids to maintain constant pressure. Bases were hit, roads destroyed, convoys shredded, not in a single massive strike but in continuous attrition. Japanese defenders could not rebuild, could not breathe. They were forced to live in anticipation of the next attack, knowing it would come at the worst possible moment. Even more devastating was the cooperation between allies. American squadrons flew side by side with Australian and Dutch crews, all wielding Havocs. The effect was overwhelming. The Japanese realized this was not merely one enemy nation but an entire coalition, all equipped with the same relentless predator. The skies seemed saturated with A-20s, their silhouettes etched against every horizon. No matter where Japan turned, it faced the Havoc's speed and firepower. One striking example came during the Battle of Leyte Gulf in 1944. While massive fleet actions dominated headlines, Havocs played a quieter but equally deadly role. They hounded Japanese supply lines feeding the battle, annihilating convoys and smashing airfields on secondary islands. Without fuel, without ammunition, Japanese resistance at Leyte weakened faster than anticipated. Pilots flying Havocs described the campaign as a hunt without end, swooping from dawn until dusk, every sortie finding new prey. The Havoc's versatility again proved decisive. Some squadrons fitted them with extra fuel tanks, extending reach deep into the archipelago. Others modified them for night raids, disrupting Japanese attempts to move supplies under cover of darkness. Each adaptation reinforced the same truth: the Havoc was not a bomber in the traditional sense. It was a predator, evolving to every mission, every condition, every need. For the Japanese there was no defense. Zeros that once ruled the skies found themselves outmatched not by dogfighting but by irrelevance. The Havoc did not duel, it killed infrastructure, slaughtered troops, and vanished before fighters could respond. Anti-aircraft fire, once a source of pride, became an exercise in futility. Crews complained they could not even draw a bead before the Havoc was gone. Bases fortified with bunkers and camouflage still fell, because speed made concealment meaningless. By the end of the Philippines campaign, Japanese morale had cracked. Entire garrisons surrendered not only because of hunger or lack of reinforcements, but because they had lost faith in the skies. To them, the Havoc embodied inevitability. No defense worked. No plan held. No hope remained. I believe this was the climax of the Havoc's transformation. In Europe, it had proven itself a raider. In Russia, it became a scythe. In the Pacific's early campaigns, it was a predator. But in New Guinea and the Philippines, it turned the entire theater into a hunting ground. Every soldier, every convoy, every plane was prey. The Havoc had become not just a weapon but a psychological force, a shadow cast across two oceans that crushed the will of empires. For Japan, it was the beginning of the end. For the Allies, it was proof that speed and persistence could dismantle even the most fanatical defenders. And for history, it was the moment the Havoc's legend burned brightest, written in fire across the jungles and seas of the Pacific. By 1945, the end was coming, though Japan refused to see it. Its empire, stretched thin across the Pacific, was crumbling. Convoys lay at the bottom of the sea, garrisons starved on forgotten islands, and once mighty airfields had become shattered craters. Yet even in those final months, one predator still circled above, delivering blow after blow with a speed and ferocity that made resistance futile. That predator was the A-20 Havoc. As the Allies surged through the Philippines into Okinawa, the Havoc retained its role as the scourge of logistics and morale. Each day, squadrons roared across Japanese positions, their engines echoing through valleys and over jungles. At Okinawa, Havoc struck staging areas, troop concentrations and coastal defenses with surgical precision. Marines advancing inland described the Havocs as guardians, always arriving just ahead of enemy counterattacks, raking trenches with machine gun fire and dropping bombs that shattered bunkers. To Japanese troops there was no respite. Even when American forces paused, the Havocs kept hunting. Japan's desperate attempts at defense highlighted the futility. Zeros scrambled from scattered airstrips, but by 1945 they were shadows of their former selves. Their engines were worn, their pilots inexperienced, their tactics outdated. Against the Havoc's twin-engine thrust and blistering speed, interception was nearly impossible. Reports spoke of Zeros diving futilely as Havocs pulled away, too fast and too low to be caught. Anti-aircraft fire remained equally ineffective. Havocs attacked from angles and altitudes that made aiming a gamble rather than a defense. The Havoc strikes now carried symbolic weight. In Europe, it had hunted convoys across occupied France. In North Africa, it had shredded Rommel's lifelines. In Russia, it had scythed through German columns at Kursk. And now, at the very edge of Japan's empire, it delivered the final hammer blows. For Japanese soldiers on Okinawa, the realization was brutal. This was not just an American weapon. This was the same aircraft feared by Germans on the Western Front and Russians on the Eastern. It was a global predator, present everywhere, relentless in every sky. One of the most striking features of the Havoc's final campaign was its tempo. Missions ran continuously, dawn patrols, midday raids, dusk assaults. At night, modified Havocs prowled with radar, hunting shipping that still dared to slip through straits under cover of darkness. Japanese officers described the experience as living under constant pursuit, like prey hounded by a predator that never slept. The Havoc is always there, one prisoner admitted, in the day, in the night, in the storm. We can never escape it. The Philippines campaign had already shown how Havocs could dismantle an enemy's ability to move. By 1945, the strategy became absolute. Havocs targeted bridges, tunnels, and coastal warehouses, severing every artery. When Japanese troops tried to retreat, they found roads cratered and convoys obliterated. When reinforcements attempted to land, Havoc swooped in and scattered them. Step by step, the Empire's infrastructure disintegrated under the relentless pressure of speed. Meanwhile, the Allies expanded their use of Havocs beyond America. Australian squadrons flew them in joint missions, French forces had employed them earlier in Europe, and the Soviets still flew them on the Eastern Front. This multinational adoption meant the Havoc was no longer just a single nation's weapon. It was the shared executioner of the Axis. From Normandy to Manila, from Kursk to Okinawa, Axis troops faced the same nightmare machine. To many soldiers, it seemed as if the Havoc multiplied across continents, present everywhere at once. The Japanese perception of inevitability deepened. Diaries recovered from Okinawa and other island garrisons spoke of despair, of men convinced that no defense could withstand the fast bombers. One soldier wrote bitterly, "We dig, we hide, we pray, but the Havoc always finds us. Our commanders promise defense, but there is no defense." For an army already isolated and starving, the psychological blow was fatal. Strategically, the Havoc's final contributions ensured that Japan's capacity to resist invasion eroded rapidly. By the summer of 1945, its strikes had left supply chains in tatters, airfields wrecked, and morale shattered. When combined with the larger firepower of B-29 strategic raids and naval bombardments, the Havoc's role might seem small. But in truth, it was the scalpel that cut deep every day, every hour, ensuring that resistance collapsed from within as well as from without. The image of the Havoc in 1945 is almost mythic. A twin-engine shadow sweeping over beaches, its guns spitting fire, its bombs falling like hammers of judgment. To German soldiers on the retreat from Kursk, to Japanese sailors and convoys off Leyte, to Axis garrisons clinging to hopeless defenses, the memory was the same. It was not just a machine, it was inevitability given wings. By the time the war ended, the Havoc had flown with American, British, Soviet, Australian, Dutch, and French crews. It had fought across every front, in every climate, against every Axis power. Few aircraft in history could claim such universal presence. And fewer still could claim such universal fear. To the Axis, the Havoc was not just an aircraft. It was the reminder that no matter where they stood, no matter how far they retreated, the Allies' reach was faster, sharper, and inescapable. I believe this is why the Havoc deserves its legend. It was not glamorous like the Mustang, nor iconic like the Spitfire. But it was everywhere, in every fight, cutting arteries, shattering morale, and leaving destruction in its wake. Germany learned it in burning convoys, Japan learned it in shattered airfields, and the world learned it in the final collapse of two empires. In the skies of 1945, there was no safe haven. Only the Havoc, circling, striking, vanishing. The final hammer blows were not only bombs and bullets. They were the sound of inevitability, roaring from twin engines, echoing across oceans, announcing the end of Axis power forever. When the dust of war is examined in hindsight, it is tempting to focus only on the giants. The massive fleets, the super battleships, the heavy bombers that seem to dominate the headlines. Yet wars are not always decided by giants. Often, it is the flexible predators, the smaller, faster, relentless machines that shift the balance. The A-20 Havoc emerged in precisely such a moment, filling a void that the Allies desperately needed to close. The problem was clear by 1940–41. Germany's blitzkrieg had demonstrated that speed was the essence of modern warfare. Armies no longer won by grinding attrition alone. They won by cutting arteries, collapsing supply networks, and paralyzing opponents before they could respond. The Allies, scattered across continents, faced an enemy that thrived on sudden impact. Britain needed a weapon that could raid German-occupied Europe with precision and speed. The Soviet Union, once invaded, needed a machine that could slash through columns of panzers and choke German supply lines. In the Pacific, America and Australia needed a predator that could strike convoys and airfields across thousands of miles of ocean. Heavy bombers like the B-17 and Lancaster were devastating but slow to prepare, slow to deliver, and vulnerable at low altitude. Fighters like the Spitfire or Mustang were superb at dueling in the skies but lacked payload capacity. What was missing was a bridge, an aircraft that could fly fast like a fighter, hit hard like a bomber, and adapt to missions across multiple theaters. That bridge was the A-20 Havoc. The Havoc answered questions that no other aircraft of its class could. How do you destroy convoys moving under cover of night and jungle? You send Havocs at treetop height, ripping them apart before they can scatter. How do you dismantle rail networks across occupied France or Ukraine? You unleash swarms of Havocs to strike bridges, depots, and junctions, vanishing before defenses respond. How do you crack open fortified airfields on remote Pacific islands? You send Havocs skimming above the surf, dropping bombs on parked planes and burning fuel tanks. This adaptability explained why so many Allied nations embraced the Havoc. The British called it the Boston, using it for both daylight raids and night fighter missions. The Soviets demanded it in massive numbers, turning it into a workhorse of the Red Air Force. The Americans and Australians flew it through the Pacific, while Free French squadrons painted tricolor roundels on its wings. Everywhere the Axis looked, the Havoc appeared, an international predator that no defense seemed able to stop. The problem for the Axis was not just material but psychological. Germany had invested its faith in heavy flak defenses and interceptors designed for slower, higher-flying bombers. Japan had trained pilots to fight dogfights against nimble opponents. Both were unprepared for a machine that blended categories, flying low, fast, and loaded with bombs and guns. Every defense doctrine built by Berlin and Tokyo was undermined by the Havoc's presence. Its speed magnified the effect. The A-20 could fly at more than 300 miles per hour at low altitude, fast enough to outrun interception and too quick for most flak crews to track effectively. In practice, this meant Axis soldiers rarely even fired before destruction arrived. To face the Havoc was to feel helpless, a sensation more corrosive than losses themselves. Men can fight bravely when they believe they have a chance. Against the Havoc, chance evaporated. This is why Axis troops across 2 continents described it not as a machine but as a hunter. In their memoirs, they remembered its sudden arrival, its roar like thunder rolling low across the ground, the way it seemed to appear out of nowhere and vanish into the horizon, leaving only wreckage. German troops cursed the Boston that shredded their convoys. Japanese survivors whispered of the daylight demons that descended without warning. Both recognized the same truth: the Havoc was not just another aircraft. It was a predator that turned every battlefield into its hunting ground. The Allies saw in the Havoc something more than tactical value. They saw reassurance. For British civilians, the Havoc meant that German cities were no longer immune to reprisal raids. For Soviet soldiers, it was proof that the Western Allies were supplying not just words but steel that killed Germans. For Americans and Australians, it was the hammer that cracked Japanese strongholds open for infantry and Marines. And for Free French airmen, flying Havoc symbolized the restoration of national pride. The broader issue it solved was coordination. Wars on multiple fronts required a weapon that could be standardized, mass-produced, and shared across nations without endless retraining. The Havoc, with its simple handling and rugged design, became that weapon. It required fewer adjustments than other Lend-Lease aircraft, and it delivered results regardless of pilot experience. It was not glamorous, but it was reliable, and reliability in war is often more decisive than brilliance. By 1945, the Havoc had become not only a solution to specific problems but also a symbol of Allied strength. It embodied the principle that victory came not from singular acts of glory but from relentless, coordinated, repeated strikes. Each Havoc raid might not have been decisive alone, but together they drained Axis strength across continents. The very ubiquity of the aircraft, appearing in the skies of France, Russia, New Guinea, and the Philippines, made it an icon of Allied inevitability. The problem the Axis never solved was simple: how to fight an aircraft that never gave them time. Germany tried with flak, Japan tried with fighters, but speed defeated both. The Havoc forced them to accept a grim reality: they were prey in skies they once thought they controlled. And in that inversion, when hunter became hunted, the fate of 2 empires was sealed. This was the true context of the Havoc's rise. It was born from necessity, embraced for adaptability, and remembered as inevitability. In the greatest war humanity has ever fought, it proved that sometimes the smaller machine, the faster blade, can shape the course of history more profoundly than the largest guns or the heaviest bombs. Every legend in war has an engine at its heart. For the A-20 Havoc, that engine was the twin Wright R-2600 Cyclone, each delivering 1,600 to 1,700 horsepower. Together they transformed the Havoc into a streak of steel capable of speeds over 300 miles per hour, blistering fast for a bomber of its class. While heavy bombers lumbered through the sky, the Havoc cut across battlefields like a blade, low, fast, and merciless. The design philosophy was simple yet radical: trade size and payload for speed and versatility. The A-20 carried up to 4,000 pounds of bombs, less than the massive payloads of A-17 or Lancaster, but it delivered them with surgical precision at altitudes too low for defenses to react. Unlike traditional bombers, which dropped from high altitudes, the Havoc specialized in skip bombing, a daring technique where bombs were released at wave-top height, skipping like stones across water until they slammed into ships. Against Japanese convoys, This turned the Havoc into a maritime executioner, sinking transports and crippling escorts with terrifying efficiency. Its armament evolved with the war. Early versions carried nose-mounted machine guns, but combat experience demanded more. Soon, Havocs bristled with firepower. Up to 6 or 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns in the nose, dorsal turrets for defense and flexible positions for gunners. This transformed the aircraft into a flying gunship, able to strafe columns of trucks or shred enemy infantry in trenches. In the Pacific, these gun-heavy Havocs were nicknamed strafer versions, flying just meters above ground to deliver walls of lead. Survivability was another secret. The Havoc was armored where it mattered, around the cockpit, fuel tanks, and engines. Self-sealing fuel tanks minimized the risk of catastrophic fire, and its twin-engine design gave crews a chance to limp home even if one was shot out. Pilots trusted it. Many told stories of Havocs riddled with holes, yet still landing safely. In contrast, Axis designs like the Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber became infamous as flying lighters, fast but fragile, erupting into flames with a single hit. The Havoc inverted this equation. It was fast and durable, a combination that destroyed morale among its enemies. The cockpit layout also deserves attention. It was designed for teamwork. Pilot, bombardier/navigator, and gunner worked as a unit. The pilot controlled speed and attack runs, the bombardier released weapons with precision, and the gunner defended the rear. This division of labor allowed Havocs to operate in complex environments, weaving through flak while delivering pinpoint strikes. Soviet crews especially appreciated this structure, as it mirrored their doctrine of collective action. In terms of technical innovation, the Havoc also pioneered modularity. Its nose could be swapped for different roles: glass noses for bombardiers and precision strikes, solid noses for gun-packed strafing runs, and radar-equipped noses for night fighting. This meant one airframe could fulfill multiple missions, saving resources and ensuring maximum adaptability. In Britain, radar-equipped Havocs hunted German bombers at night. In Russia, gun-nose Havocs smashed panzer divisions. In the Pacific, skip-bombing Havocs stalked shipping lanes. One plane, endless rolls. To appreciate the Havoc's place, let's compare it directly with its Axis opponents. Feature: A-20 Havoc, Ju-88 Germany, Mitsubishi G4M Betty, Japan. Engines: 2 times Wright are 2600, 1600 horsepower each. 2 times Jumo 211, 1340 horsepower each. 2 times Mitsubishi Kase, 1530 horsepower. Max speed: 339 mph, 545 km per hour. 292 mph, 470 km per hour. 265 mph, 427 km per hour. Payload: up to 4,000 pounds bombs. 3000 lb bombs. 200 lb bombs plus torpedoes. Armament: 6 to 8 times .50 cal MG plus turrets. Mixed MG/20 cannons. Light defensive MGs. Survivability: armored plus self-sealing tanks. Moderate. Poor, nicknamed cigar lighter. Typical mission: low-level strike/skip bombing. Medium bomber/dive bombing. Torpedo bombing long range. The numbers tell the story. The Havoc outpaced its rivals, carried comparable payloads, and offered unmatched survivability. Against the Ju-88, Germany's workhorse, it was faster and more flexible. Against the Japanese Betty, it was simply superior in every way: stronger, deadlier, and far less vulnerable. But numbers alone cannot explain why soldiers remembered the Havoc as terror incarnate. It was the way it fought. Low-level runs at 300 miles per hour meant targets often had seconds, sometimes less, to react. Anti-aircraft crews described sweating as the roar grew louder, too fast for calculation. By the time they raised their guns, bombs were already falling. Convoy sailors spoke of ships exploding before alarms could sound. Infantrymen compared strafing runs to a storm of metal shredding earth itself. The speed also created a psychological paradox. Heavy bombers could be spotted, tracked, anticipated. The Havoc was almost invisible until the moment of attack. A shape over the tree-line, a glint of sunlight on wings, and then destruction. This suddenness was more terrifying than massed raids, because it denied preparation. Fear thrives in unpredictability, and the Havoc embodied it. The Havoc's design also foreshadowed future generations of attack aircraft. Its concept, a fast, versatile strike platform able to deliver precision at low altitude, prefigured the A-26 Invader, the A-1 Skyraider, and even the modern A-10 Thunderbolt II. Each inherited the Havoc's core philosophy: hit hard, fly fast, survive. In many ways, the Havoc was the ancestor of the modern close air support aircraft, proving that endurance and adaptability outweighed elegance. Another technical factor in its success was maintainability. Crews could repair Havocs under primitive conditions: jungle airstrips, desert fields, frozen Soviet steppe runways. Spare parts were interchangeable, engines rugged, and systems forgiving. In contrast, Axis designs often required delicate maintenance. The Havoc's ability to keep flying under rough conditions ensured that its presence was constant, a shadow that never left the battlefield. Even its silhouette contributed to its aura. The twin engines, the forward heavy fuselage, the aggressive nose bristling with guns, all suggested a predator in flight. Soldiers recognized it instantly, and with recognition came dread. The Havoc's very shape became shorthand for danger. To summarize, the Havoc's terror was not magic but mechanics. Twin engines for speed. Modular design for versatility. Armor and self-sealing tanks for survival. Heavy forward guns for aggression. Skip bombing for innovation. Maintainability for persistence. All these factors combined into a warplane that Germany and Japan could not counter. And when multiplied across the Allied coalition, the effect was overwhelming. The Havoc was not built to win glory in dogfights or to carry monumental bomb loads across oceans. It was built to stalk, strike, and survive. And in doing so, it revealed a truth of modern warfare: that speed and adaptability are more lethal than size and spectacle. The Axis clung to battleships, heavy bombers, and dueling fighters. The Allies unleashed the Havoc, and in its roar lay the sound of empires collapsing. Wars are not only lost on the battlefield but also in the mind. Germany and Japan did not simply fall to superior numbers. They fell because they misjudged what kind of weapons would dominate the skies. The A-20 Havoc, dismissed at first as an in-between machine, neither a heavy bomber nor a nimble fighter, exposed that blindness. By the time Axis commanders realized its impact, it was too late. The first mistake was conceptual. Germany built its air strategy on the belief that heavy bombers like the Heinkel He-111 and medium bombers like the Ju-88 would dictate campaigns. These aircraft were designed for blitzkrieg, to soften defenses for tanks and infantry. But they lacked speed and flexibility. When confronted with Havocs flying at treetop level, the Luftwaffe's doctrine collapsed. German flak and interceptors were optimized for high-altitude threats, not predators darting across valleys at 300 miles per hour. They had invested in the wrong fight. Japan's miscalculation was even more striking. Obsessed with the dogfighting prowess of the Zero, Tokyo assumed that aerial dominance would come from maneuver and pilot skill. But the Havoc refused to play that game. It did not duel Zeros at altitude. It struck airfields, convoys, and runways, crippling Japan's ability to fight before combat even began. Every time Japan expected a fight in the air, the Havoc delivered destruction on the ground. The Empire's emphasis on elegance and spirit left it helpless against speed and inevitability. The table shows what words alone cannot. The Havoc combined speed, survivability, and adaptability in ways neither Axis power matched. The He-111, once the spearhead of blitzkrieg, was slow and outdated by mid-war. The Japanese Betty could fly long distances but had the survivability of a paper lantern. Against the Havoc, both looked obsolete. The second mistake was psychological. Germany and Japan both underestimated the effect of speed at low altitude. They assumed war would be decided by spectacular duels or massive bombing campaigns. But soldiers on the ground do not remember doctrine. They remember fear. And fear grew when an enemy could strike in seconds, faster than nerves could react. Axis soldiers described the Havoc not in technical terms but as an unstoppable force. To them it was always too fast, always too sudden. That perception broke morale as surely as bombs broke steel. The third mistake was strategic. Germany divided its air power between fighters, bombers, and experimental weapons, spreading resources too thin. Japan, with far fewer resources, doubled down on naval aviation and ignored multipurpose attack craft. In contrast, the Allies embraced the Havoc as a universal solution. Britain used it to raid Europe. The Soviets used it to smash panzers. The Americans used it to erase Japanese convoys. Instead of asking a plane to win glory, they asked it to deliver results. And it did across every front. Even within the Allied camp, comparisons highlight why the Havoc was special. The B-25 Mitchell carried heavier loads but lacked the Havoc's speed at low level. The B-26 Marauder was fast but notoriously difficult to handle, earning a reputation as a widowmaker early in the war. The A-26 Invader, which replaced the Havoc, was more advanced but owed its philosophy to the A-20. In many ways the Havoc was the perfect balance. Easy to fly, rugged, fast, and deadly enough to frighten enemies across two hemispheres. The irony is sharp. Germany, the architect of Blitzkrieg, should have understood speed as a weapon. Japan, the champion of maneuver, should have respected versatility. Yet both clung to doctrines shaped by pride rather than practicality. They built weapons to match their ideals, elegant fighters, giant battleships, and bombers suited for early victories. The Allies built Havocs. Ugly to some, inelegant to others, but devastatingly effective. History punished vanity and rewarded adaptability. One cannot overstate how deeply this miscalculation echoed. For German soldiers retreating across Russia, the sight of Havocs overhead confirmed that the Red Army's reach extended everywhere. For Japanese convoys scattered in the Philippines, each Havoc strike proved that even the sea offered no sanctuary. The very presence of the Havoc told them, "You are hunted and there is no defense." I believe this explains why the Havoc remains less celebrated yet more decisive than many famous fighters. The Spitfire and Mustang won glory in duels, but the Havoc ended wars by erasing logistics, morale, and movement. Germany and Japan lost not because they lacked courage but because they misjudged what mattered. They built machines to inspire. The Allies built machines to endure. And so the lesson stands: in modern war the deadliest mistake is arrogance. To underestimate a machine like the Havoc, fast, adaptable, relentless, is to surrender before the battle begins. Germany and Japan made that mistake. And in the roar of twin engines over deserts, steppes, and jungles, their empires paid the price. By the spring of 1945, the A-20 Havoc had carved its legend in smoke across Europe, Russia, and the Pacific. But its true impact was not limited to the war it helped win. Its legacy lay in the doctrines it validated, the technologies it foreshadowed, and the psychological imprint it left on both enemies and allies. When the Axis finally collapsed, the Havoc's shadow remained, shaping the future of aerial warfare and military thought. The first consequence was doctrinal. Before the war, many military thinkers still believed in distinct categories of aircraft: fighters for duels, bombers for heavy strikes, reconnaissance planes for intelligence. The Havoc blurred these lines. It could bomb, strafe, reconnoiter, and even hunt at night with radar. This adaptability proved that the future of air power lay in multi-role designs, capable of shifting missions rapidly. The A-26 Invader, its successor, inherited this principle. Later generations, from the F-4 Phantom to the F-35, all carried echoes of the Havoc's lesson. That versatility is not a compromise but a necessity. The second consequence was strategic. The Havoc demonstrated that wars could be won not only by destroying armies in the field but by severing the arteries that sustain them. Germany's reliance on convoys and rail networks, Japan's dependence on supply ships and island airstrips, all were systematically dismantled by fast-strike aircraft like the Havoc. This principle became central to post-war air doctrine. Attack logistics and the enemy will collapse from within. From Korea to Vietnam to Desert Storm, the idea of striking supply lines and infrastructure at speed traces its lineage back to Havoc's cutting through Axis convoys. The third consequence was psychological. For Allied soldiers, the Havoc was reassurance. Proof that their skies were never empty, that predatory wings always guarded their advance. For Axis troops, it was inevitability given form. Survivors described the sound of its engines as haunting long after the war. Just as the Stuka had once symbolized German terror, the Havoc became the emblem of Allied inevitability. Armies live and die by morale. The Havoc crushed Axis morale every time it appeared, and that effect lingered as a cautionary tale for generations of strategists. Technologically, the Havoc shaped the evolution of attack aircraft. Its modular nose, swappable between bombardier glass or gun-packed solid, inspired future designs with interchangeable payloads. Its heavy forward armament prefigured the gunships of later decades. Its skip bombing techniques laid the groundwork for precision low-level strike doctrines. Even its rugged construction influenced Cold War designs, where survivability became as important as speed. In many ways, the A-20 was a prototype for the modern close-support aircraft, less glamorous than fighters but indispensable for victory. Its global presence also had long-term effects. Unlike many American planes confined to one theater, the Havoc flew under British, Soviet, French, Australian, Dutch, and American colors. This multinational adoption built shared tactical knowledge across Allied forces. Pilots from different nations compared techniques, shared modifications, and refined doctrines together. In doing so, the Havoc helped knit the coalition closer, uniting them under a common predator. After the war, this spirit of shared doctrine would inform NATO's emphasis on standardization and interoperability. The Havoc's civilian afterlife reinforced its durability. Retired airframes became crop dusters, survey planes, and even firefighting aircraft. Farmers in the United States and South America used them to spread seed and pesticides. Firefighters dropped water from bomb bays once meant for explosives. This transformation testified to the rugged practicality of its design. A machine built to tear apart armies now nurtured fields and saved forests. The irony was not lost on those who had once flown them in war. Culturally, the Havoc became a quieter legend. Unlike the Mustang or Spitfire, it did not dominate films or posters. But among veterans, it held a special reverence. It was the plane that always came back, the plane that always struck, the plane that never failed. In memoirs, pilots spoke less of glory and more of trust. They trusted the Havoc to do its job, to survive, to carry them home. That reputation shaped how future designers approached aircraft. Reliability and adaptability became virtues greater than elegance. For the Axis, the Havoc's legacy was humiliation and hard lessons. German commanders admitted after the war that their air defenses had been calibrated for the wrong threat. Japanese officers wrote bitterly that their obsession with zero dogfights blinded them to low-level strike aircraft. In both cases, the Havoc forced a reckoning. Modern war would not be decided by individual skill or single decisive battles, but by systemic pressure, applied relentlessly from the air. In the Cold War, these lessons echoed. The United States fielded aircraft like the A-26 Invader and later the A-1 Skyraider, direct descendants of the Havoc in philosophy. The Soviet Union, having flown Havocs during the war, developed its own rugged, multi-role strike aircraft, influenced by what it had learned from American steel. The idea of the fast, durable, versatile strike platform became universal doctrine, crossing ideological divides. Even the fear the Havoc instilled lived on. In Korea, North Korean and Chinese troops spoke of American attack aircraft as the machines that come too fast. In Vietnam, low-level gunship raids echoed the Havoc's tactics, bringing terror at night and sudden death by day. The sound of engines rushing low over treetops became a universal symbol of danger, a psychological inheritance of the Havoc's roar. Looking back, one can see the Havoc as more than a weapon. It was a bridge between eras. It stood between the old world of distinct categories, fighters, bombers, reconnaissance, and the new world of multi-role adaptability. It stood between the spectacle of heavy bombing campaigns and the precision of tactical strikes. It was not glamorous, but it was decisive. The most enduring consequence, perhaps, was humility. The Havoc proved that wars are not won by machines built to inspire myths but by machines built to deliver results. Germany and Japan clung to myths: the noble Zero, the unstoppable battleship, the decisive duel. The Allies wielded Havocs, workmanlike, relentless, adaptable. In that contrast lies the true story of why one side collapsed and the other prevailed. Today, few outside military history circles speak of the A-20 Havoc. Yet its DNA runs through every modern strike aircraft. Every time a multi-role plane switches from bombing to reconnaissance, every time a fast jet strikes supply lines instead of dueling fighters, every time survivability is prioritized over glamour, the Havoc's ghost is present. Its legacy is not in statues or parades, but in the very shape of how modern air wars are fought. And so, the Havoc endures, not as a star but as the constellation behind them. Its influence remains written in doctrine, in design, and in the memories of those who lived under its roar. For Germany and Japan, it was the sound of collapse. For the Allies, it was the sound of victory. For history, it was the sound of inevitability. War has a way of choosing its champions. Sometimes it is the glamorous fighter, the elegant machine that wins duels and dominates posters. Sometimes it is the heavy bomber, a flying fortress that drops thunder on cities. But sometimes, it is the unsung predator, the one that does not seek glory but delivers results. The A-20 Havoc was that predator. From the first low-level raids over France to the burning convoys of North Africa, from the endless steppes of Kursk to the smoking islands of the Pacific, the Havoc left its mark everywhere. It was the common thread that tied together Allied campaigns across continents. German soldiers cursed it as the Boston that shredded their supply lines. Japanese troops whispered of daylight demons that descended without warning. Across two hemispheres, enemies who never met each other shared the same nightmare. The sudden roar of twin engines, the impossible speed of a strike, the devastation left behind. The lesson it teaches is sharp and enduring. First, wars are not always won by spectacle. The Zero was elegant, the battleship Yamato was majestic, but both became tombs of arrogance. The Havoc, squat and unglamorous, prevailed because it was practical, adaptable, and relentless. Second, speed is more than velocity, it is surprise, pressure, inevitability. By striking before defenses could react, the Havoc robbed the Axis of its ability to resist. Third, versatility is survival. A machine that could bomb, strafe, recon, and fight at night meant no gap in Allied capability. That versatility turned the Havoc into a constant threat, a predator without rest. I believe that is why the Havoc deserves remembrance. It was not just a tool of destruction, it was a philosophy of war embodied in steel. It showed that endurance, adaptability, and teamwork win battles more surely than pride or myth. Its roar carried not just bombs but a message, that inevitability favors those who prepare, those who adapt, and those who strike with speed. As history looks back, the A-20 Havoc is easy to overlook among the legends of the Mustang, the Spitfire, or the Flying Fortress. But if you ask the German convoy driver on the steppe, or the Japanese sailor off Leyte, or the infantryman crouched in a trench in New Guinea, they will tell you another truth. The Havoc was the shadow that never left, the predator that always returned, the machine that announced the end of their world. So as we close the story, imagine that sound once more. The sudden, rising roar of twin engines at treetop height, the flash of guns, the earth-shaking impact of bombs, and then, silence except for the flames. That was the sound of Germany and Japan collapsing, not before beauty or myth, but before power and speed. If this story of the A-20 Havoc has captured your imagination, subscribe to the channel, join us for more cinematic journeys into history's machines and moments, and keep the past alive in the present. Because history, like the Havoc, strikes hardest when we least expect it.